I gave water to a wounded alien, and what he showed me about God's throne will shatter everything your church told you. A dying extraterrestrial being collapsed in a Texas field didn't ask for my salvation, he offered me his. And what he revealed about God's throne will make you question every sermon you've ever heard. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about a vibrational truth that's been hidden behind stained glass and Sunday rituals for 2,000 years. This being from another world showed me that the throne of God isn't up there. It's been inside you this entire time, waiting to be activated. Once you see what I saw, there's no going back to comfortable Christianity. This will set you free from spiritual drought, but it might cost you your certainty. Because when you realize that serving others is the throne, that every act of compassion opens a portal the Vatican never mentioned, everything changes. If you're ready to remember what organized religion made you forget, hit subscribe and activate the bell. Because what happened to Caleb Monroe in the summer of 2017 will crack open the desert inside your soul. Now let me tell you how a simple glass of water became my gateway to divine consciousness. Caleb Monroe was 49 years old when he stopped believing God was listening. He lived alone on his farm in Lubbock, Texas. Just him, the cattle, and a tired old dog that followed him everywhere like a shadow of better days. The house stood at the end of a long dirt road, surrounded by fields that used to mean something. Now they were just land, dry, cracked, waiting for rain that never came. 5 years. 5 years since Martha died. 5 years since he buried her under the oak tree on the east pasture, the one she used to sit under with her Bible and her iced tea. He could still see her there sometimes, in his mind, smiling, reading, peaceful, but peace was something Caleb didn't know anymore. The dry hills stretched out in every direction, rolling and endless, reflecting the emptiness he carried inside. The land was beautiful once, green, alive. Now it looked like him, worn down, forgotten. The sun beat down on the cracked soil every single day, relentless and unforgiving, just like the guilt that burned in his chest. He'd prayed at her bedside. "Take me instead," he'd whispered, holding her thin hand. "God, please, take me instead." But God didn't answer. She died anyway, and Caleb was left standing there, wondering why his prayers went nowhere. The cattle moved slowly across the land, heads low, tails flicking at flies. They didn't care about his pain. They just needed water, food, shelter, simple things. Caleb envied them for that. They didn't ask questions, didn't wonder why life was cruel. They just lived. He used to talk to God all the time. Before Martha got sick, before the doctors said there was nothing more they could do, he'd wake up early, walk the fields, and pray while the sun rose. It felt natural then, like breathing. Now it felt like shouting into a canyon. The mornings were the hardest. He'd wake up at dawn, the bed cold and empty beside him, and for a split second he'd forget. For one beautiful, terrible moment, he'd think Martha was in the kitchen making coffee. Then reality would crash back in, heavy and suffocating, and he'd remember. She was gone, and he was still here. The routine kept him moving. Feed the cattle, check the fences, repair what was broken. The work was endless, and that was good. It kept his hands busy, kept his mind from wandering too far into the dark places. But at night, when the work was done and the house was too quiet, there was nowhere to hide. Caleb would walk outside and stare up at the sky. The stars were endless out here. No city lights to drown them out. Just billions of points of light scattered across the dark. It should have made him feel small. Instead, it made him feel invisible. "Where are you?" he'd ask. "Nothing. I'm still here. I'm still trying." Silence. He'd stand there until his neck hurt, waiting for something. Anything. A sign. A feeling. A whisper in his heart that said he wasn't alone. But there was only the wind, and the wind just carried memories. Memories of Martha laughing in the kitchen, flour on her hands from making biscuits. Memories of Sunday mornings when they'd drive into town for church, her hand resting on his knee, her voice humming along to the hymns on the radio. Memories of the night she told him she was scared, her eyes wet with tears, and he promised her everything would be okay. He'd lied. It wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. The guilt ate at him like acid. He replayed every decision, every moment. Should he have pushed for different treatments? Should he have taken her to Houston, to the big hospital? Should he have prayed harder, believed more, done something, anything, differently? The questions had no answers. But they came anyway, night after night. relentless as the Texas heat. The dog, an old cattle dog named Duke, was his only witness now. Duke had been Martha's dog, really. She'd raised him from a pup, trained him, loved him. Now he was Caleb's responsibility. The dog would sit beside him on the porch, head resting on Caleb's boot, eyes half closed. Duke didn't judge, didn't ask why Caleb stopped going to church, didn't wonder why he talked to himself in the dark. Duke just stayed, and that was enough. Barely. The church folks had tried at first. Pastor Jim came by with casseroles and condolences. The ladies from the prayer circle sent cards. Neighbors stopped in to check on him, offering help with the farm, inviting him to Sunday dinners. But Caleb couldn't face them, couldn't sit in those pews and sing about God's faithfulness when he felt nothing but absence, couldn't smile and nod while people told him Martha was in a better place, that it was all part of God's plan. What kind of plan takes a woman like Martha? A woman who never hurt anyone, who spent her life serving others, who believed with her whole heart. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. So Caleb stopped going, stopped pretending. The visits became less frequent. The calls stopped coming. Eventually, people left him alone. And that's what he wanted, right? The Texas wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying dust and the faint scent of mesquite. It sounded like voices sometimes, soft, distant, like the land itself was trying to tell him something he couldn't quite hear. At night, lying in bed, Caleb would stare at the ceiling and wonder if this was it, if this was all there was left. Work until he was too tired to think. Sleep until the nightmares woke him. Repeat until one day his heart just stopped, and he could finally rest. It wasn't living. It was just existing. Caleb Monroe believed God had forgotten him. He believed he'd been left behind, abandoned in this desert of grief and silence, punished maybe, for something he couldn't name, or worse, simply not worth remembering. But he was wrong, because the sky was preparing an answer that would come wrapped in light and dust, in a language he didn't know he could understand, an answer that would shatter everything he thought he knew about God, about faith, about himself. It was coming, soon, and when it arrived, Caleb Monroe's life would never be the same. It was a hot summer night when everything changed. The air felt different, heavy, electric, like the atmosphere was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Caleb couldn't sleep. He never could anymore. The sheets felt like sandpaper against his skin, the pillow too flat, the darkness too thick. So he did what he always did, grabbed his boots, walked outside, and headed toward the water tank near the back pasture. The moon was high and bright, casting silver light across the dry grass. Duke trotted beside him, ears perked, alert. The dog sensed it too. Something was off. The usual night sounds, crickets, distant coyotes, the rustle of wind through the mesquite, all seemed muted, subdued, like the world was waiting. Caleb reached the tank and bent down, cupping water in his hands to splash his face. The coolness felt good against his sun-worn skin. He stood there for a moment, eyes closed, letting the night air wash over him. His neck ached. His back ached. Everything ached these days. That's when he saw it. A light. Not from the house, not from the road. This light was coming from beyond the pasture, spiraling down from the sky in slow, deliberate motion. At first, Caleb thought maybe it was a plane, but planes didn't move like that. They didn't pulse and breathe and spiral like something alive. It wasn't a lightning strike. The sky was clear, stars sharp and bright against the black. It wasn't a helicopter. Too quiet, too smooth. It was something else entirely. Something alive. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. His heart started pounding, hard and fast, the way it used to when he was young and scared of thunder. The light moved with purpose, descending in a graceful arc that seemed almost choreographed. It pulsed with a rhythm that felt organic, like a heartbeat made of photons. Duke growled low, backing up against Caleb's leg, hackles raised. "Easy, boy," Caleb whispered, his voice shaking. The ground trembled, just a little, a vibration that ran up through the soles of his boots and into his bones, enough to feel it, enough to know this was real. The light touched the earth about 200 yards out, past the fence line, in the open field where nothing grew anymore. The grass there had been dead for 2 seasons, choked by drought and poor soil. But now it was illuminated, glowing like someone had set fire to heaven and let it fall. For a moment, everything went silent. The crickets stopped. The wind died. Even the distant hum of the highway, always present on quiet nights, faded away into nothing. Then the light dimmed. Not gone, just softer, like someone turning down a lamp. Caleb stood frozen, staring. His mind raced through possibilities. A meteor? Some kind of military craft? Kids from town playing a prank with drones? None of it fit. Every instinct told him to run, to get back to the house, lock the doors, call someone, call the sheriff, call Pastor Jim, call anyone. But something else pulled at him. Curiosity, wonder, maybe even hope. What if? What if this was the sign he'd been asking for? What if God was finally answering? He started walking. Duke whined but followed, staying close, his body pressed against Caleb's leg. Caleb's boots crunched through the dry grass, each step feeling heavier than the last. His hands were shaking. His chest felt tight. Part of him wanted to turn back. Part of him couldn't stop moving forward. As he got closer, he saw something in the grass. A shape, a figure. It was lying on the ground, partially hidden by the tall weeds and dust kicked up by whatever had landed. Caleb slowed, his heart hammering now. He could make out details in the moonlight. Pale skin, almost white, like milk left out in the sun. Limbs that were too long, too thin, bent at angles that didn't quite match human proportions. And eyes, golden eyes that reflected the moon like polished coins. The being was breathing, struggling, hurt. Caleb's training kicked in. Years of tending injured cattle, of handling emergencies on the farm without a vet. He dropped to his knees without thinking, his fear momentarily pushed aside by instinct. Up close, he could see the wounds. Burns, maybe. Or something like them. The skin was blistered in places, blackened in others. The creature's chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths that rattled slightly, like fluid in the lungs. Jesus, Caleb whispered, not as a prayer, but as an expression of shock. The being's head turned slightly toward him. Those golden eyes locked onto his. There was no aggression in them, no threat, just pain, deep and raw, and something else. Recognition, like this being knew him. Caleb's hand shook as he reached for the canteen on his belt. His fingers fumbled with the cap, nearly dropping it. He unscrewed it, poured water into his cupped palm, and held it out. Here, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Drink. The being didn't move at first. Those golden eyes just stared, unblinking, measuring. Then slowly, with great effort, it leaned forward. Its lips, thin, pale, almost translucent, touched the water in Caleb's hand. And that's when he heard the voice, not out loud, inside his mind. Soft, gentle, clear as a bell on Sunday morning. The water you give me comes from the same source that sustains you. Caleb jerked back, stumbling, water spilling from his hand. His breath came fast and shallow. His mind screamed that this wasn't possible, that he was dreaming, that he'd finally lost it, finally cracked under the weight of 5 years of grief and loneliness. But the voice came again, patient and calm. Do not be afraid. Caleb stared at the being, his chest tight, his hands trembling. The creature's golden eyes held his, steady and calm. There was kindness there, compassion, intelligence, and something deeper, something that felt like home, like this being knew him, had always known him, knew his pain, his questions, his desperate prayers sent into the void. The desert inside Caleb, the one he'd been living in for 5 years, shifted, just a little, just enough. He didn't understand what was happening, didn't understand who or what this being was, didn't understand why it was here, why it had fallen from the sky, why it was speaking inside his head. But in that moment, kneeling in the dirt with water dripping from his hands and Duke pressed against his side, Caleb Monroe felt something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. He felt seen. Caleb stood slowly, his legs unsteady beneath him. His eyes were still locked on the being, but something else caught his attention. The dust around where the creature had landed, it wasn't settling randomly. It was forming a pattern, a perfect pattern. 3 circles, interlaced and overlapping, drawn in the dirt as if by an invisible hand. Each circle was the same size, their edges meeting at precise points, creating a symbol that felt ancient, familiar somehow, like something he'd seen in a dream he couldn't quite remember. Above them, the light that had descended with the being still lingered. It hovered about 10 feet off the ground, a sphere of silver luminescence that pulsed gently, rhythmically, like breathing, like the light itself was alive, inhaling and exhaling in perfect time with the earth beneath it. The being's eyes opened wider now. Those golden irises caught the moonlight and threw it back, creating small halos of illumination in the darkness. But there was no fear in those eyes, no panic, no confusion, just gratitude, deep, silent gratitude. "Can you stand?" Caleb asked, his voice hoarse. The being didn't respond with words, but slowly, painfully, began to move. Caleb immediately stepped forward, sliding his arm under the creature's shoulders. The being was lighter than he expected, almost weightless. "Easy now," Caleb murmured. "I've got you." Together they stood. Duke circled them nervously, whining low in his throat but not barking. The dog seemed confused, caught between instinct and something deeper. Caleb looked toward his property. The old barn stood about 100 yards away, dark and weathered against the night sky. It wasn't much, but it would provide shelter, privacy. "Come on," Caleb said softly. "Let's get you inside." The walk back felt like it took hours. Every step was careful, measured. The being leaned against him, its breathing labored but steadier. The silver light followed them, hovering above like a silent guardian. When they reached the barn, Caleb kicked the door open with his boot. The smell of old hay and dust filled his nostrils. He guided the being inside, past rusted equipment and feed bags, toward the back where hay bales were stacked. "Here," Caleb said, lowering the creature gently. "This'll have to do." The being settled back, chest still rising and falling. Caleb grabbed an old blanket from a hook and draped it over the creature's legs. That's when the being reached out. Its hand, long-fingered, pale, delicate, touched Caleb's wrist. Heat spread immediately, not burning, just warmth, pure, radiating warmth that moved up Caleb's arm, across his chest, down into his gut. It dissolved the fear, the panic, the 1,000 questions racing through his mind. All of it just melted away. "What are you?" he whispered. The being didn't answer with words, but its eyes held his, and Caleb felt understanding wash over him. Duke barked once, sharp and loud. Caleb turned. The dog was standing at the barn entrance, hackles raised, staring. But then Duke's ears flattened, his tail dropped, and slowly he padded forward. The being extended its hand toward the dog. Duke sniffed once, twice. Then, to Caleb's shock, the dog lay down beside the hay bale, resting his head on his paws. No aggression, no fear, just acceptance. Like Duke recognized something sacred in this creature. That's when the light came. It started in the being's chest. A soft golden glow that pulsed once, then again, then began to expand outward in gentle waves. The light filled the barn, chasing away shadows, making everything look somehow more real. Caleb felt it in his bones, a vibration, subtle but unmistakable. It started in his chest and spread outward, moving through his arms, his legs, down into the earth. He could feel the entire farm resonating. The land, the buildings, everything hummed in harmony. It was like the whole world had suddenly remembered how to sing. The voice came again, soft inside his mind. "I am not your enemy." Caleb swallowed hard. "Then what are you?" "I am a reminder." "A reminder of what?" "Of what you have forgotten." His eyes drifted to the symbol outside, still visible through the barn door. The 3 interlaced circles, now glowing with the same golden light from the being's chest. "What does it mean?" Caleb asked. "The circles?" The being's eyes followed his gaze. "It is the mark of unity. 3 that are one that is 3. The pattern of all creation." Caleb didn't fully understand, but he felt the truth of it anyway. The symbol outside began to glow brighter, not with reflected light, but with its own inner luminescence. It pulsed in time with the being's heartbeat, creating a rhythm that felt older than time itself, a living seal. Caleb knelt beside the hay bale, his hands still tingling. Duke's breathing had slowed, peaceful. The silver light outside continued to hover. And for the first time in 5 years, Caleb Monroe felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The barn settled into quiet. The golden light dimmed to a soft glow. Duke slept beside the hay bale, breathing deep and peaceful. The being's eyes had closed, its breathing more even. Caleb should have felt relief. He'd helped a wounded creature, provided shelter, done the right thing. But instead, the weight came back. That familiar crushing weight. It settled over his shoulders like a wet blanket, heavy and suffocating. The adrenaline faded, and the past rushed back in. Martha. God. He missed her. He sat down on an overturned feed bucket, his face in his hands. The grief hit in waves sometimes. One moment fine, the next drowning in memories and regret. He remembered the hospital room, the beeping machines, the antiseptic smell, Martha's hand in his. So small, so fragile. I'm scared, Caleb. I know, baby, I know. He'd prayed that night, prayed harder than he'd ever prayed, knelt beside her bed, gripped her hand, begged God for a miracle. Take me instead, he'd whispered, tears streaming. Please, God, take me. Let her stay. But God didn't answer. And 3 days later, Martha was gone. Since that night, he'd been living like a man serving a sentence. Wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. The farm didn't care that his heart was broken. Life just continued, indifferent, relentless. Faith had become routine, hollow ritual. He still said grace, more from habit than belief. Still kept Martha's Bible on the nightstand, though he hadn't opened it in months. Love had become a photograph, yellowed and fading on the mantel. A frozen moment that felt further away every day. He talked to God sometimes, late at night when silence became unbearable, but it always felt one-sided. Why? He'd ask the darkness. Why her? Why not me? No answer. Are you even there? Nothing. Always silence. Caleb wiped his eyes, angry at himself for crying, angry at God for not listening. That's when the voice came. Soft, gentle, undeniable. God never fell silent. Caleb's head snapped up. The being's eyes were open, glowing faintly. Those golden irises looked at him with such compassion, it hurt. You just closed the ear of your heart. The words hit like a physical blow. Caleb's breath caught. That's not fair, he said, voice breaking. I prayed. I begged. I did everything I was supposed to do. You prayed with words, the voice said gently, but your heart was screaming accusations. Caleb stood abruptly, pacing. My wife died, a good woman, and I was left here alone. You're telling me that's my fault? I am telling you that grief closed the door. Pain turned your heart inward, and in that darkness, you forgot how to hear. Hear what? Caleb demanded, tears streaming. What was I supposed to hear? That you were never alone, that every sunrise was a message, that every breath was an answer, that love didn't end when she did. Caleb's legs gave out. He sank back onto the bucket, face in his hands, shoulders shaking with sobs he'd held for 5 years. I don't know how to do this, he whispered. I don't know how to keep going. You don't have to keep going without her, the voice said softly. Energy does not disappear. It only changes form. She is in the wind, in the rain that will come, in every act of love you choose to give. Caleb looked up, vision blurred. I don't understand. You will. The being's hand lifted slightly. Caleb hesitated, then reached out, placing his hand in the creature's. Warmth flooded through him. But this time it carried images. He saw Martha in their kitchen, laughing, in the garden, smiling at the sun, in church, hands raised, at peace, and he felt her, not as memory, but as presence, real, close. She's proud of you, the voice whispered, and she wants you to live, not just exist. Live. The tears came harder, but they felt different, cleaner, like something inside was finally breaking open. The ground beneath him pulsed. The barn floor, the earth, it all vibrated gently, resonating with his grief, with the slow opening of his heart. Duke stirred, patted over, rested his head on Caleb's knee. A quiet reminder, you're not alone. The miracle has not yet begun, the voice said softly, but it has already chosen you. Caleb didn't know what that meant, but sitting there in the golden light with his hand in the being's hand, Caleb Monroe felt something shift, just a crack, just enough light to slip through. Dawn came slowly to the Texas plains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Caleb hadn't slept. He'd spent the night sitting on that overturned bucket, watching the being rest, watching Duke sleep, trying to make sense of what was happening. But sense felt like the wrong tool for this job. As the first light crept through the gaps in the barn walls, the being stirred. Those golden eyes opened, clearer now, stronger. The wounds on its skin had faded considerably, the burns now just faint marks, like old scars already healing. The voice came soft in Caleb's mind. "Come." Caleb stood, his joints stiff from sitting all night. "What do you need?" "Place your hand over my heart." Caleb hesitated. His hand hovered in the air, uncertain, but the being's eyes were patient, kind, inviting. Slowly, Caleb reached forward and placed his palm flat against the creature's chest. The light came instantly. It didn't blind him. It consumed him. The barn dissolved around him like smoke, the walls and roof and hay bales all fading into pure, radiant clarity. Caleb gasped, but he couldn't pull his hand away. Didn't want to. He was standing in light. Pure light. Not white, not gold, but something beyond color. Something that existed in a spectrum human eyes weren't meant to see, but somehow, right now, he could. And then he saw it. The throne. It wasn't made of stone or wood or metal. It wasn't sitting on clouds or perched on some distant mountain. It was right there, in front of him, made entirely of vibration, of movement, of living, breathing luminescence that pulsed and shifted and sang. "What is this?" Caleb whispered, his voice echoing in the vast emptiness. "This," the voice said gently, "is not a place." Caleb stared, trying to understand. The throne seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere at once. It had no edges, no boundaries. It was a state of being more than a physical object. "It is the central state of every living soul," the voice continued. "The seat of consciousness, the core of love, the throne of God." "But where is it?" Caleb asked, turning, searching the light for anchors, for reference points. "It does not reign over," the being said. "It reigns within." The words settled into Caleb's chest like stones dropping into still water, creating ripples that spread through his entire being. "You mean, it's inside people? Inside every living thing. The throne is not a destination. It is a remembering. It is the center from which all love, all compassion, all divinity flows." Caleb's mind raced. All his life he'd been taught to look up, to pray toward heaven, to seek God in the sky and the church in the pages of Scripture. But this, Jesus, the voice said softly, and suddenly the light shifted. A figure appeared within the radiance, not standing above it, not separate from it, but inside it, part of it. A man with kind eyes and gentle hands, smiling with a warmth that made Caleb's chest ache. Jesus, but not the Jesus from the paintings, not the pale, suffering figure on the cross. This Jesus was radiant, alive, whole, and he wasn't ruling from above. He was present within the light itself, woven into its very fabric. He did not come to build an empire, the being said. He came to ignite an internal sun, to remind humanity that the kingdom of God is not out there, it is in here. Caleb felt tears streaming down his face. He didn't know when he'd started crying. Every act of compassion, the voice continued, every gesture of kindness, every moment of genuine love, these are fragments of the throne made manifest. These are pieces of God's reign expressing itself through human hands. Caleb watched as the light around Jesus pulsed and expanded, and he saw it. Saw how every time someone helped another person, fed a stranger, held a grieving friend, forgave an enemy, the throne appeared, not in heaven, right here, right now. Prayer is not petition, the being said. Prayer is remembering, remembering who you truly are, remembering the divinity you carry, remembering that you are not separate from the source, you are an expression of it. Caleb's knees buckled. He would have fallen, but there was no ground to fall to. Just light, just presence, just truth washing over him in waves so powerful he thought he might dissolve entirely. And love, the voice said, softer now, almost a whisper. Love is not a feeling. Love is the fundamental force, the true government of the universe. Not power over, but power through. Not control, but connection. Love is how God reigns, not with an iron fist, but with an open hand. Jesus smiled at Caleb from within the light. And in that smile, Caleb felt every question he'd ever asked answered. Not with words, not with explanations, but with understanding that bypassed his mind entirely and went straight to his soul. You are loved. You have always been loved. You will always be loved. The light began to fade slowly, gently, like a sunset in reverse. The barn walls returned, the hay bales, the smell of dust and old wood. Caleb was on his knees now, his hand still pressed against the being's chest, tears streaming down his face. But he wasn't sad. He was awake. Caleb pulled his hand back slowly, his whole body trembling. He sat back on his heels, wiping his face with his sleeve, trying to catch his breath. Duke had woken up and was watching him with those knowing eyes, tail wagging slowly. The being sat up carefully, movements fluid now, the injuries almost completely healed. The golden eyes studied Caleb with something that felt like pride. "The water you gave me," the voice said softly, "is a symbol of the eternal flow of the divine." Caleb looked at his hands, still remembering the moment he'd offered water to this wounded stranger. It had felt so simple then, so human, just basic decency. But it was more than that, wasn't it? Water is life, the being continued. It moves, it adapts, it nourishes, it cleanses, it connects. As the words came, Caleb saw it, not with his eyes, but with something deeper. He saw rivers of light flowing between worlds, between hearts, between souls, luminous streams of energy that moved through everything, connecting all life in an invisible web of giving and receiving. "The same water that quenches the thirst of the soil," the voice said, "heals the wounds of the soul." Caleb watched as the vision unfolded. He saw how every act of kindness created ripples in these rivers of light, how every cup of water given, every meal shared, every hand extended in help sent waves through the entire network. "There is a cycle," the being explained. "Give, receive, transform. This is the pattern of divine flow. This is how love moves through the universe." Caleb thought of Martha, how she'd always been the first to help a neighbor, how she'd organized meals for sick families, how she'd volunteer at the shelter every Thursday without fail. She'd understood this, hadn't she? Jesus spoke of living water, the voice continued. He used bread and wine as symbols, but the essence was always the same, the flow, the giving, the connection. Caleb saw Jesus at a well, talking to a Samaritan woman, saw him breaking bread with outcasts, saw him washing the feet of his disciples. Every action a demonstration of the flow, every gesture a reminder that divinity moves through service. To serve, the being said, is to worship. The words landed in Caleb's chest like an anchor finding its home. All those years of sitting in pews, of singing hymns, of listening to sermons about proper doctrine and correct belief. And the answer had been so much simpler. Just help people. Just give. Just love. Every act of kindness is a liquid prayer, the voice whispered. It flows from your heart, through your hands into the world, and returns to the source. And in that flow, healing happens. Transformation occurs. Caleb looked toward the barn door. Outside, he could see the silver light still hovering above his field, pulsing gently. But now he saw it differently. It wasn't just light. It was a reflection, a mirror of what was happening inside him. The external always reflects the internal. The being smiled, and Caleb noticed for the first time that the wounds were almost completely gone. Just faint lines remained, like memories of pain rather than pain itself. "How did you heal so fast?" Caleb asked. "I did not heal myself," the being replied. "Healing came through the intention, through your choice to help rather than fear, through your willingness to give water to a stranger. That love, that compassion, that is the medicine that heals all wounds." Caleb shook his head in wonder. "So the cure isn't in the earth? Isn't in medicine or science? The cure is in the intention that guides the hand using the medicine. The cure is in the love that motivates the science. Healing does not come from the substance. It comes from the consciousness that applies the substance with care." The being stood slowly, fully upright now, no longer struggling. The golden eyes caught the early morning light streaming through the barn. Duke stood too, tail wagging, perfectly calm in the presence of this otherworldly visitor. "You gave me water when I was dying," the being said, "and in that simple act, you opened a door. You activated something ancient inside yourself. You remembered what it means to be human." Caleb felt it, that door, that opening. Something in his chest that had been locked for 5 years was finally, slowly, beginning to crack open. The being placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. The touch was warm, real. "The throne is invisible," it said softly, "but the effects are not. Every time you choose love, you make the invisible visible. Every time you serve, you let God reign, not someday in heaven. Right now, right here." Caleb nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Outside, the silver light pulsed brighter, dancing in the dawn, reflecting the transformation happening in a dusty barn in the middle of nowhere, Texas. The being rarely spoke in the way humans understood speech. Caleb had noticed this from the beginning, but now, in the growing morning light, he understood it more clearly. It wasn't words. It was something else entirely. The being communicated in waves, pulses of meaning that bypassed language altogether and landed directly in Caleb's consciousness, like ripples moving across the surface of still water, each one carrying information, emotion, understanding. It was music without sound. Caleb closed his eyes and just listened, not with his ears, but with something deeper. And as he did, images began to form in his mind, not his own memories, not his own imagination. These were being given to him. He saw planets, worlds spinning in darkness, lit by distant suns. Some were blue and green like Earth. Others were colors he didn't have names for, each one teeming with life, with consciousness, with souls learning and growing and evolving. He saw cities, not made of concrete and steel, but of crystal and light. Structures that seemed to grow organically, like living things. Streets that flowed like rivers. Buildings that breathed. And beings, so many different kinds of beings, moving through these places in harmony. And he felt it. Peace. Deep, unshakable peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of complete unity. A state of existence where separation was just an illusion, and connection was the fundamental truth. "We came to remind you," the voice said, gentle as morning dew, "to remind you of what you have forgotten." Caleb opened his eyes, tears streaming down his face again. Forgotten what? Who you are, what you are capable of, the truth that was taught and then buried under centuries of misunderstanding. The being's golden eyes held his, and Caleb felt himself falling into them, into depths he couldn't measure. "Jesus," the voice continued, "was one of us, and one of you." Caleb's breath caught. His chest tightened. He was a bridge, the being explained, between matter and consciousness, between the physical and the infinite. He came from the stars and wore human flesh to show you that these two states are not separate, that divinity can express itself through material form, that you are not just bodies, you are eternal consciousness having a temporary human experience. Shame washed over Caleb, hot and heavy. All those years of doubt, all those nights cursing God, all that anger and bitterness and disbelief. "I gave up," Caleb whispered. "I stopped believing. I thought God abandoned me." "You did not give up," the voice said softly. "You were in pain, and pain clouds vision. It is not failure. It is not sin. It is simply the human condition. You are forgiven for what you never needed forgiveness for." The light around the being pulsed brighter. Caleb realized it was responding to something, to him, to the opening happening in his chest. The more his heart cracked open, the more the light expanded. They were connected. "Heaven does not speak the language of religion," the being said. "It speaks the language of vibration, of frequency, of resonance. Words divide, vibration unites." Caleb thought about all the denominations, all the theological arguments, all the debates about who was right and who was wrong, who was saved and who was damned. And suddenly it all seemed so small, so petty. "You mean it doesn't matter what church I go to?" Caleb asked. "It matters what frequency you carry," the voice replied. "It matters whether you choose love or fear, connection or separation, service or selfishness. The building you sit in on Sunday is irrelevant. The state of your heart is everything." Caleb felt something vibrating in his chest now, not metaphorically, actually vibrating, a gentle hum that seemed to resonate with the light emanating from the being. "You feel it," the voice said with something like joy. "You feel the truth. It vibrates at a frequency higher than any dogma, any doctrine, any human interpretation of the divine. This is the language of heaven. This is how God speaks." And Caleb did feel it, stronger than any sermon he'd ever heard, more real than any scripture he'd ever read. This wasn't belief. This wasn't faith in the traditional sense. This was knowing, direct, unmediated, undeniable. The being reached out and placed a hand over Caleb's heart. The vibration intensified, spreading through his entire body, making his fingers tingle, his scalp prickle, his bones hum. "You are worthy," the voice said firmly. "You have always been worthy. Worthiness is not earned. It is inherent. You are worthy to hear the name of God because you carry the presence of God within you. You always have. Caleb broke down completely. His shoulders shook with sobs. Not sobs of grief this time, but of release, of recognition, of coming home to a truth he'd known as a child but forgotten as an adult. Duke pressed against his leg, warm and solid. The being's hand remained on his chest, steady and sure. And in that moment, surrounded by hay and dust and morning light, Caleb Monroe felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt holy, not because he'd done anything special, not because he'd earned it, but because holiness was his birthright, because divinity flowed through him just as it flowed through everything. "Remember this," the being said softly. "When I am gone, when you return to your regular life, remember that heaven's language is not spoken, it is felt, and you now know how to hear it." Caleb nodded, unable to speak, his heart too full for words. The light pulsed once more, brighter than ever, filling the barn with radiance that felt like love made visible. Night fell over Texas like a blanket being pulled across the sky. But inside the barn, time seemed to exist differently. The golden light from the being kept the space illuminated, warm, suspended in a state that felt neither day nor night, but something in between. Eternal, maybe. The being stood and walked to the barn door, moving with complete fluidity now, no trace of injury remaining. It pushed the door open wider, letting the cool night air flow in. The silver light outside still hovered, dimmer now but present, like a faithful companion waiting patiently. "Come," the voice said. Caleb stood and followed. Duke trotted beside him, tail wagging slowly. They stepped out into the night, and Caleb's breath caught. The sky. He'd looked at this sky his entire life, had studied it from this exact spot countless times, but he'd never seen it like this. Every star seemed brighter, sharper, more present, like each point of light was aware of him, acknowledging him, responding to him. "Look," the being said softly. "Really look." Caleb tilted his head back, and as he did, something shifted in his perception. The stars weren't just distant balls of burning gas. They were alive, conscious, connected, and they were responding to the change in his heart. One star pulsed, then another, not randomly but in response to the frequency he was now carrying. Like the universe itself was saying, "I see you, I recognize you, welcome back." "None of us are separate," the voice said, echoing not just in Caleb's mind, but in the wind itself, in the rustling grass, in the distant cry of a night bird. "Not you from me, not earth from the stars, not humanity from the divine. It is all one fabric, one consciousness experiencing itself through infinite forms." Caleb felt it, not as philosophy, as reality. He could feel the connection now, stretching out from his heart to the stars, to the grass beneath his feet, to Duke beside him, to the being standing next to him. Threads of light linking everything. "The universe," the being continued, "is a single breath of God, inhaling potential, exhaling creation. You are not separate from that breath. You are that breath, made manifest." Tears rolled down Caleb's cheeks, but he was smiling now, smiling through the tears. "Jesus is not coming back on clouds," the voice said gently. "He is not returning as a conquering king on a white horse to judge the living and the dead." Caleb turned to look at the being, confusion flickering across his face. "But the Bible says—" "The Bible is metaphor," the voice interrupted kindly. "Poetic truth encoded in symbols. Jesus returns through you, through every human who chooses love over fear, through every act of compassion, every gesture of forgiveness, every moment of genuine connection." Caleb's mind reeled. "You mean he's already returning? He never left," the voice said. "The Christ consciousness is eternal. It can never be absent. It can only be forgotten. And now it is being remembered, person by person, heart by heart. The second coming is not an event. It is an awakening, and it begins in each individual who chooses to open." Caleb understood. He understood with such clarity it was almost painful. The return of Christ wasn't something to wait for. It was something to participate in, to embody, to become. "Fear is dissolving in you," the being observed. "Do you feel it?" Caleb nodded. The fear that had gripped him for 5 years. Fear of death, fear of abandonment, fear of meaninglessness. It was evaporating like morning mist under rising sun. In its place, tenderness, a softness toward himself, toward his life, toward his grief, and guilt. The voice continued. The guilt you carried for surviving, for being angry, for doubting. It is releasing. Caleb felt it leaving his body like physical weight being lifted. The guilt over Martha's death, the guilt over his anger at God, the guilt over every perceived failure, gone, replaced by acceptance, by understanding that he'd done the best he could with what he knew, that grief was not sin, that doubt was not betrayal, that being human meant being imperfect, and that imperfection was not only acceptable, it was sacred. She is here, the voice whispered. Caleb froze. What? Your wife. She has been with you this entire time. You could not feel her because your grief was too loud. But now that your heart is opening, Caleb felt it. A presence. Warm, familiar, loving. Not a ghost, not a haunting. Just Martha. Her essence, her love. Still present, still close, still caring for him. He turned slowly, and though he saw nothing with his physical eyes, he felt her standing beside him, felt her hand on his shoulder, felt her smile, that smile he'd loved for 23 years. Martha, he whispered. He felt her response, not in words but in warmth, in reassurance, in love that transcended death because love was never bound by the physical to begin with. She was okay. She was at peace, and she wanted him to be at peace too. Caleb's knees buckled and he sat down hard in the dirt, laughing and crying at the same time. Duke licked his face, whining softly. The being stood over him, radiating calm. Heaven and earth are not separate places, the voice said. They are frequencies, states of consciousness. And right now, in this moment, they meet within you. You are the intersection. You are the bridge. Caleb looked up at the stars, at the endless expanse above him, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel small. He felt connected, part of something vast and beautiful and eternal. The space between the stars wasn't empty. It was full of love. Caleb watched in silent awe as the being's body continued its transformation. What had taken hours was now accelerating. The faint scars that remained from the burns were disappearing entirely, the pale skin becoming luminous, whole, perfect. No medicine, no bandages, no surgery, just light, silence, and something Caleb was beginning to understand as faith, not the kind preached from pulpits, but the kind that operated at a cellular level, a knowing so deep it bypassed belief entirely. Healing, the voice said softly, is not the addition of something new. It is the remembering of original perfection. Caleb tilted his head, trying to understand. What does that mean? Every cell in your body knows its divine blueprint, the being explained. It remembers the pattern of wholeness, illness, injury, disease. These are not natural states. They are disruptions, forgettings. When you remember, when you reconnect to the source frequency, the body naturally returns to its perfect state. As the being spoke, Caleb felt something shift in his own chest, a warmth that started small, like an ember, then began to spread. It moved through his rib cage, down his arms, into his legs, up into his neck and head. The chronic ache in his lower back, the one that had bothered him for a decade, legacy of too many years hauling feed and fixing fences, simply stopped. Gone. Not dulled, not managed. Gone. The tension he'd carried in his shoulders since Martha died, that constant knot of stress and grief, unwound like rope being loosened. The heaviness in his chest, that weight that made every breath feel like work, lifted. Caleb gasped, his hand flying to his heart. What's happening? Love, the voice said simply. Love is reorganizing what absence had disturbed. Caleb felt tears streaming down his face again. But these weren't tears of sadness or even joy. They were tears of release, of letting go, of old pain finally finding permission to leave. For 5 years, the being said gently, you have carried grief in your body. It became part of your structure. Your muscles learned to hold it. Your bones learned to bear it. But grief was never meant to be permanent. It is a wave, meant to move through you and then release. The warmth intensified, pulsing now in rhythm with Caleb's heartbeat. He could feel it working, moving through places he didn't even know were hurt. Old injuries, forgotten traumas, buried emotions, all of it rising to the surface, acknowledged, and then dissolved in the light. Physical pain and spiritual pain are not separate, the voice continued. Your body is not separate from your soul. When the heart grieves, the flesh suffers. When the spirit heals, the body follows. Caleb understood. He'd been treating his body like a machine, pushing it through the motions while his heart remained locked in anguish. But body and soul were one system. You couldn't heal one without the other. When you heal someone, the being said, standing now, fully restored and radiant, you heal the entire world. Caleb looked up, confused. How is that possible? Because separation is illusion, the voice explained. When one part of the web is restored, the whole web strengthens. Every act of healing sends ripples through the collective consciousness. You cannot lift one person without lifting all people, because all people are one. The being's golden eyes blazed with intensity now, not threatening but powerful, like looking into the heart of a star. Compassion, it said, is not weakness. It is not mere emotion. It is technology. Celestial technology disguised as tenderness. Caleb stood slowly, his body feeling lighter than it had in years, decades maybe. He felt young again, not in age but in energy, in possibility. You mean compassion is a tool? The most powerful tool in the universe, the voice affirmed. It is the force that reorganizes chaos into order, that transforms pain into peace, that converts death into life. Your scientists study the visible forces, gravity, electromagnetism, nuclear forces, but they have not yet measured the most powerful force of all, love, and its active expression, compassion. The being stepped forward and placed both hands on Caleb's shoulders. The touch was light, but somehow anchored him, made him feel more present in his body than he'd ever felt. You came to me wounded, the being said. You gave me water when you had every reason to fear. That single act of compassion initiated a cascade of healing, not just for me, but for you, because that is how the technology works. In giving, you receive. In healing, you are healed. Light began to emanate from the being's entire form now, not just its chest. Golden radiance that filled the barn, warm and alive. Duke stirred from sleep, lifting his head, tail beginning to wag even in his drowsiness. The being was fully restored, completely whole. Standing tall and graceful, no longer the wounded creature Caleb had found in the field, but a being of pure luminescence and power. My mission here, the voice said, a note of completion in its tone, is fulfilled. Caleb felt his chest tighten. You're leaving? Yes. When? Soon. Panic flickered in Caleb's heart. But I have so many questions. There's so much I don't understand. The being smiled, and in that smile Caleb saw infinite patience. Understanding comes through living, not through explanation. You have been given what you need. Now you must walk the path. Your mission is just beginning. My mission? Caleb's voice cracked. I'm just a farmer. I'm nobody. You are everybody, the being corrected gently, because you are willing to serve. And service is how divinity moves through the world. You are not being asked to preach or convert or build monuments. You are being asked to love, to help, to remember who you are, and to help others remember who they are. The light grew brighter still, almost too bright to look at directly, but Caleb didn't look away. He couldn't. The invisible healing has happened in you, the voice said. Now you carry it. Now you can give it, not through magic words or special powers, through presence, through kindness, through choosing connection over isolation, love over fear, service over selfishness. Caleb nodded, understanding blooming in his chest like a flower opening to sun. His mission wasn't complicated. It was simple. Just be kind. Just help. Just love. The being released his shoulders and stepped back. The golden light began to retract, pulling back into its form, preparing for something, for departure. Thank you, Caleb whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you, the being replied, for choosing love. The hours before dawn were the quietest Caleb had ever experienced. He sat on the porch with Duke beside him, watching the barn, knowing what was coming. The being had told him without words. The time was near. As the first hint of light touched the eastern horizon, the field began to glow. That same silver luminescence from the first night returned, spreading across the dry grass like water, turning everything ethereal and dreamlike. Caleb stood, his heart pounding, and began walking toward it. The being emerged from the barn, moving with fluid grace, no longer wounded, no longer weakened, fully itself. Whatever magnificent thing that was, it walked with purpose toward the spot where it had first landed, where the three interlaced circles still remained faintly visible in the dust. As the being approached, the symbol ignited, not with fire, but with light. The three circles blazed with the same golden radiance that had come from the being's chest, connecting and pulsing, forming a pattern that seemed to exist in more dimensions than Caleb could see. A portal, that's what it was. A doorway between here and somewhere else. Somewhere vast and beautiful, and beyond human comprehension. Caleb wanted to run forward, wanted to beg the being to stay, wanted to ask for more time, more lessons, more presence. But he didn't, because he understood now. Some things weren't meant to stay. Some gifts came and went, leaving only their imprint, their teaching, their transformation. Nothing ever truly leaves, the voice said, as if hearing his thoughts. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It only changes form. I will not be gone. I will simply be elsewhere. But what we have shared, that is eternal. That lives in you now. Caleb's throat tightened. I'll miss you. You will feel me, the being replied. Every time you choose love. Every time you serve another. Every time you remember who you really are. The being stepped closer, reaching out one final time. Its hand pressed against Caleb's chest, directly over his heart. Warmth flooded through him, and time seemed to dissolve. For an instant, maybe a second, maybe an eternity, Caleb saw. He saw humanity, all of it, every person who had ever lived or would ever live. And they weren't separate individuals. They were sparks, fragments of the same fire, expressions of the same consciousness, different faces, different stories, but all lit by the same divine flame. He saw himself in the homeless man in Lubbock, in the president on television, in the child playing in a distant country he'd never visit, in the enemy soldier, in the saint. All of them, him, all of him, them, one light, infinite forms, serving others. The voice said, its tone carrying finality now, is remembering who you are, because there are no others. There is only God, experiencing itself through every living thing. The hand pulled away. The vision faded. Caleb staggered back, gasping, tears streaming down his face. The being turned toward the portal. The circles spun faster now, creating a vortex of light and energy that hummed with power. Wait, Caleb called out, his voice breaking. The being paused, looking back one last time. How do I know I can do this? Caleb asked. How do I know I'm strong enough? The golden eyes held his with infinite compassion. You already did it. You gave water to a stranger. Everything else is just remembering that moment, again and again and again. And with that, the being stepped into the light. The portal blazed brilliant white, too bright to look at directly. Caleb shielded his eyes, but he could still see the outline of the being dissolving into pure radiance, becoming one with the light itself. Then, silence. The portal collapsed inward, the circles fading, the silver light retracting until it was gone completely. The field returned to normal. Dark grass, dry soil, nothing to indicate anything extraordinary had happened. Except everything had happened. Caleb stood there breathing hard, Duke pressing against his leg. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of hay and dust and something else, something sweet and clean, like rain about to fall. His knees gave out and he dropped to the ground, but not in despair, not in fear, in gratitude, pure, overwhelming gratitude for the encounter, for the teaching, for the healing, for being chosen to receive this impossible gift. He pressed his forehead to the earth, his hands flat against the soil, and something rose from deep within him. Not words exactly, not a formal prayer, just presence, just acknowledgement, just love pouring out of him into the ground, into the air, into the universe itself. The silence of the field became a prayer, living, breathing, sacred. Above him the stars began to fade as dawn approached, but Caleb could still feel them, could still feel the connection, the web, the unity. He wasn't alone. He had never been alone. God wasn't in some distant heaven. God was here, in the soil, in the wind, in Duke's warm breath, in his own beating heart. And Caleb Monroe, simple farmer from Lubbock, Texas, was no longer the man who had lost his faith. He was the man who had found something deeper. Not faith in doctrine, faith in presence. Not belief in religion, belief in love. and that love would carry him forward, one day at a time, one act of service at a time, one moment of compassion at a time. His mission had begun. Days passed, then weeks. Life on the farm resumed its rhythm, but nothing was the same. Caleb woke each morning with the sun, same as always. Fed the cattle, checked the fences, tended to the land. The physical tasks hadn't changed, but the man doing them had. He moved differently now, lighter, more present, like he was finally inhabiting his own body instead of just dragging it through the motions. The first sign came 3 days after the being left. The reservoir, the one that had been dry for 2 years, forcing Caleb to haul water from town, started flowing again. He heard it first, that gentle trickling sound of water finding its path. At first he thought he was imagining it, but when he walked over, there it was, water, clear, cold, abundant water bubbling up from the spring that fed the reservoir. The same spring that geologists had declared dead, depleted, finished. But it wasn't finished. It had just been waiting. Caleb knelt beside it, cupped his hands and drank. The water was sweet, perfect. He laughed out loud, splashing his face, feeling like a kid again. The cattle sensed the change too. They moved differently across the pastures, less agitated, more peaceful. Where before they'd been skittish and temperamental, now they were calm. They'd gather near Caleb when he walked among them, not for food, but just to be close, like they recognized something in him. Even the sky felt different, closer somehow, more intimate. The vast Texas expanse that used to make him feel small and abandoned now felt like a blanket, like protection, like home. But the biggest change was in how Caleb related to other people. It started small. His neighbor, John Brennan, mentioned his tractor had broken down and he couldn't afford to fix it right away. Without thinking, Caleb drove over that afternoon and spent 6 hours helping John repair it. Didn't ask for payment, didn't expect anything in return, just helped. And in that helping, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Joy, not happiness dependent on circumstances, not pleasure from entertainment, but joy, deep, abiding, unshakable joy that came from the simple act of being useful, of serving, of giving without keeping score. Word spread quickly in small-town Texas. Caleb Monroe was different, changed, available. Sarah Mitchell's fence needed mending. Caleb showed up with tools and wire. The Johnsons' well pump failed. Caleb was there helping to install a new one. Old Mrs. Henderson couldn't get her groceries from town. Caleb started making weekly trips for her. He didn't announce his availability, didn't make a show of it. He just showed up, helped, and moved on. People noticed. "What's gotten into you, Caleb?" John asked one afternoon, handing him a cold beer as they sat on his porch after finishing some work. Caleb smiled, taking the bottle. "I remembered something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" "That helping feels better than hurting." It was simple, true, and John just nodded, sensing there was more to the story but knowing better than to pry. Faith, which had been a desert inside Caleb for 5 years, now flowed like a spring, but it didn't look like it used to. He didn't return to church, not because he was against it, but because he'd found something bigger than a building could contain. He prayed constantly now, not in formal words, not in memorized verses, but in presence, in attention, in gratitude for the morning light, for Duke's warm body beside him at night, for the feel of soil in his hands, for the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. Everything became prayer, every breath an acknowledgement of the sacred. He stopped asking God for signs, stopped waiting for burning bushes or voices from clouds. Instead, he became the sign. He created miracles through love, not supernatural events, but the profound miracle of one human choosing kindness over indifference, connection over isolation, service over selfishness. God was here the whole time, he thought one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I was just too angry to notice. The loneliness that had defined his existence since Martha's death began to dissolve, not because he remarried or filled his house with people, but because he stopped feeling separate. He felt connected to the land, to his neighbors, to the animals, to the sky, to the pulse of life itself. He'd go into town for supplies and find himself talking to strangers, really talking, listening, seeing them. People started seeking him out, not because he preached or proselytized, but because his presence was different, calm, grounded, safe. One afternoon, a young woman named Rebecca, someone who'd lost her husband in a car accident 6 months prior, showed up at his farm. She'd heard about Caleb, about how he'd changed, about how he'd somehow survived grief. "How do you do it?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "How do you keep going?" Caleb didn't give her platitudes, didn't quote scripture. He just made her coffee, sat with her on the porch, and told her the truth. You let yourself feel it all. You stop pretending you're supposed to be okay, and then, when you're ready, you start helping other people. Because serving takes you out of yourself, and that's where God lives, not in isolation, but in connection. She cried for an hour on his porch. He just sat with her, present, solid, not trying to fix anything, just willing to witness her pain. When she left, she hugged him tight. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you," he replied. Because her willingness to be vulnerable had reminded him of his own humanity, had given him another opportunity to serve, had created another thread in the web of connection. Caleb Monroe, the dry man, the bitter widower, the abandoned believer, had become something else, a source, not of supernatural power, not of perfect wisdom, but of simple, consistent love, the kind of love that shows up, that helps, that listens, that stays. He was a light now. Not because he'd achieved some special status, but because he'd remembered what he always was, a spark of the divine, same as everyone else. And sparks, when they remember what they are, shine. Summer faded into early autumn. The brutal Texas heat began to ease, and then one evening in late September, the sky darkened with clouds, real clouds, heavy, pregnant with rain. Caleb stood in his field, watching them roll in, and he knew. This was it, the culmination, the physical manifestation of the internal shift that had been happening for months. The first drop hit his forehead, cool, perfect, then another, and then the sky opened up. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking the cracked earth, filling the ditches, running in rivers across the parched land. Caleb stood in the middle of it, arms outstretched, face turned up to the sky, laughing like a madman. Each drop felt like a confirmation. Each rivulet running down his face echoed the miracle he'd lived through. Water, the same element he'd offered to a dying stranger, now returned 1,000-fold, blessing the land, restoring what drought had stolen. The rain fell for 3 hours. When it finally stopped, the world smelled new, fresh, alive. Caleb walked through his fields, boots squelching in mud, and marveled. Green shoots were already beginning to push through the soil. Life, dormant but not dead, responding to the nourishment it had been waiting for. He spoke less these days. Words felt increasingly unnecessary, but his eyes carried something that words couldn't convey anyway. A certainty, a knowing, a peace that passed understanding. People saw it, felt it, were drawn to it without knowing why. Life, which had been a burden for so long, had become something else. A conversation, a constant dialogue with the invisible, with the sacred, with the presence that permeated everything. He no longer needed dramatic encounters, didn't need beings from other worlds to descend and teach him. He'd learned the lesson, and the lesson was simple. Pay attention, be present, choose love. Every evening at sunset, Caleb would walk to the edge of his property and stand in silence, not praying in the traditional sense, not asking for anything, just feeling. Just being, just acknowledging the extraordinary gift of existence. The symbol, the 3 interlaced circles, had long since faded from the ground where the being landed. Wind and rain and time had erased the physical mark, but the throne remained. Interior, invisible, eternal. He could feel it now, that seat of consciousness, that central state where love reigned, not as a distant king, but as the fundamental frequency of existence itself. "Jesus reigns where there is compassion," he murmured one evening, the words rising unbidden from some deep place inside him. It was true. He felt it. Wherever kindness lived, wherever mercy operated, wherever one person chose to serve another, that was where Christ consciousness expressed itself, not in cathedrals or doctrines, but in the living, breathing choice to love. The love he'd been searching for his whole life hadn't descended from heaven. It had awakened from within, from the earth of his own being, from the soil of his own heart. He'd been looking up when he should have been looking in. That evening, as purple light painted the horizon, The silver luminescence returned, just for a moment, hovering at the edge of his field, pulsing gently. Caleb smiled. He didn't need an explanation, didn't need another encounter. He understood. It was confirmation, acknowledgement, a wordless message that said, "You remember, you understand, you are connected." The light pulsed once more, bright and clear, then faded into the dusk. Caleb stood there, hand over his heart, and spoke to the being he knew was no longer present, but also never truly absent. "Thank you," he whispered, "for reminding me." Duke barked once from the porch, calling him home. Caleb turned and walked back toward the house, his shadow long in the fading light. As he climbed the porch steps, he paused and looked back at his land, at the fields now green with new growth, at the sky deepening into twilight, at the stars beginning to emerge, and he understood, finally and completely, what the being had been trying to teach him all along. God had never left. God couldn't leave. God was the fabric of existence itself, the intelligence that animated every atom, the love that held every molecule together. Caleb was the one who had left, who had closed his eyes, who had shut his heart, who had forgotten the fundamental truth of his own nature. He wasn't separate from God. He was an expression of God, a unique, irreplaceable note in the infinite symphony of creation. And his job, his mission, his purpose wasn't complicated. Just remember, just love, just serve. That was it. That was everything. Caleb Monroe walked into his house, Duke at his heels, and felt something he hadn't felt since before Martha died. He felt complete, not because his circumstances were perfect, not because all his questions were answered, but because he'd returned to love. And in that return, he'd found what he'd been searching for all along. Himself. God. The same thing, really. Just different words for the one truth that underlies everything. Love is all there is. Everything else is just forgetting. And Caleb Monroe had finally remembered.